I'm really excited to be here with all of you to talk about how we can create better connected colleges and universities that better support our students. I've had the good fortune of working with well over 100 colleges and universities over the last 20 years. And my work with them has really been about understanding their students and then improving their experience, thinking through the spaces that students live and learn in, the services that support them, the technology systems they use, and the staff that use those systems and provide the services, and then of course the strategy that drives all that. And in doing so, I've been lucky enough to help more than 1 million students. I'm really excited to help all of you think about how to create better connected colleges and universities. And in that work with all those institutions, I've learned some things about how we can work better together to better support our students so that they can be retained, so that they can graduate, so they can find meaningful careers, so they can make an impact in the world. And I've learned about the role that space and services and systems and strategy play in enabling student success. And I've put that in my upcoming book, The Connected College. I'm really excited to share that with you all today. So as we think about creating better connected colleges, I want to start with a story of silos, which I think is going to sound familiar, unfortunately familiar to many of you. So I was working years ago on a project to create a student success hub. And at the kickoff meeting, we had all the different services, all the different offices gathered together around the table. We had the math center, we had the library, we had IT, we had the tutoring center, we had the writing center, we had the writing lab. Now, did you catch that they have a writing center and a writing lab? How many people know the difference between the two? Does anybody know? I didn't know the difference either. So I asked the obvious question, what's a writing lab and how's that different from a writing center? And they said, well, the writing center is run out of the English department, and it has graduate students who work in a peer-to-peer model, helping students on their writing, crafting the thesis, improving the structure, improving the tone, the flow. And the writing lab was run out of the student support office through the provost. It also had a peer-to-peer model, was also helping students with the structure, with the thesis, with the tone, with the flow. So two basically identical services in two different buildings doing more or less the same thing. Students were confused, not just me. Instead of working better together, they were kind of working in silos, reporting to different people, using different technologies. And so it was really the job to bring them together under one roof, to work together, to use the same systems, to use the same staff. And while it may not be as obvious as that, a writing center or a writing lab on your campus, I'm guessing as you think about your institution, there are probably ways that you can work better together. There are probably some things that you're offering that are redundant, that could be combined, that could be coordinated, that could be collaborated. Because silos and separations don't support students or staff or faculty. They get in the way. And so instead of those separations, what we want to create is more connected colleges and universities. And I think if you get these things right, then you're creating 5 key connections. The first is students feeling, and staff and faculty for that matter, feeling like they belong to a community, connecting to a community, feeling like they're part of something. Because belonging is sort of the lens that we look at all our experiences through, right? If you feel like you're part of something bigger, if you feel like you're part of a mission, if you feel like you're making progress, you're part of a community, then that's going to color your experience. It's going to brighten it or darken it. So you want to have that sense of belonging. Unfortunately, only 65% of students feel a sense of belonging right now. So we have some work to do. The second kind of connection is connecting students to support, the support that they need to succeed. So it could be a writing center, it could be tutoring, it could be connecting to mentors, it could be presentations and making more effective communication and presentation, could be research, could be technology support. But the job of being a student is more complex than ever before. And we've created a rather complex support apparatus to help them. But sometimes that can be difficult to navigate. Sometimes students don't know what help is available. Sometimes they don't feel comfortable accessing it. So we want to connect them to support. We also want courses to connect to careers. And this doesn't mean we're throwing out liberal arts or everything is vocational, because quite the opposite. The skills that you learn in the liberal arts, creativity, collaboration, communication, critical thinking, these are what every employer survey year after year ranks at the top of what people are looking for. Those are durable skills, but you want to test those skills and apply them, right? So you want students to work on real world projects in their classes. So maybe they're doing a consulting project for a community group or a company. Instead of doing a hypothetical marketing plan, you can go find a group in the community and do a plan for them, do a social media strategy. Then you're meeting real people and you're solving real problems and you're building relationships, because maybe the head of that nonprofit needs an intern this summer, or maybe they become a role model. And this is how you meet people that make career paths concrete, right? Because it's when a student meets a market researcher that their stats class comes alive, right? Because right up until that point, it's just abstract, mean, mode, median. But how am I actually going to use it? So you want courses to connect to careers. To make that happen, we need internal connections between disciplines, between departments, and we need external connections, external collaborations, where we're working with peer institutions, or we're working with community groups or companies, whether it's on experiential learning, whether it's research and innovation in an innovation district. It's fueling discoveries, it's fueling opportunity, and it's working together to make these connections. Unfortunately, a lot of our conventional wisdom in higher ed has held us back, right? We've been seeing, it's kind of about staying in your lane, don't upset the apple cart. Our strength is tradition. We need to create broad appeal. Our demographics are our destiny, right? This cliff means the end of things. So we have to create broad appeal. We see markets and missions in conflict. We struggle with this conventional wisdom, but at connected colleges, strength is really found in agility and in not demographics as destiny, but differentiation, right? Finding a strategy that helps you focus, partnering with industry on research, on experiential learning. Instead of getting spread thin, where it's all about doing more with less, you have a strategy that helps you focus so you can actually do less with more. And instead of waiting for perfect consensus before acting, you're making bold decisions. These are the kinds of connected colleges that help students succeed. And I'm really excited to talk about how safe, secure, sustainable spaces can help students, faculty, and staff do that. So in our session today, we're going to talk about 3 barriers to these kinds of collaborations, 3 big trends I think you need to be thinking about for the future, and an example that speaks to each. So we're going to talk about strategy as a barrier and how it can be more outward focused, and how colleges and universities can really catalyze workforce and economic development. And I'll share an example of creating a new health innovation district in Charlotte to do just that. Then we're going to talk about structure as a barrier and how sometimes silos, separations, legacy structures, they can get in the way of working together to enable student success. And one way to get over or around that barrier is really by thinking about how things can be co-located, coordinated, consolidated, how you can grow in place before you build more space, renovate spaces to make them sustainable in every sense of the word. And finally, we'll talk about culture as a barrier, how sometimes we're bound by tradition, maybe things are a bit insular instead of being interconnected. And that gets in the way of creating more porous campuses where we're mixing uses and users. We have folks from the community, from local companies, working side by side with students, with faculty, with staff. And I'll share an example of doing that at Carnegie Mellon. I see strategy as maybe the first big barrier that most folks encounter. Every college or university has a strategic plan, but very few have an actual strategy where you're making choices about where to play and how to win. Instead, strategic planning is often sort of misunderstood as this opportunity to make anodyne statements about innovation and excellence, or it's misunderstood as let's create a big enough tent where everything we do fits underneath it, as opposed to making choices and helping you focus and helping you say no, whether it's a program or a partnership. It should help you focus so that you can do less with more, not more with less. And as you're focusing, of course, it's tempted to look inward, but I think good strategy looks outward as well as inward. It not only looks at your people and your programs and where you have strength, but it also looks outward to where the community has need, where local companies have need, how you can work together. And I think at a time when research funding is in question, and historically it's been very difficult to get funding for basic research, it's going to be more and more important to think about how our projects, how our programs are really catalysts for workforce and economic development, right? How are they building the skills, the competencies, the experiences for the workforce of the future? How are they creating jobs? How are they creating economic impact? How are they creating mobility? And I know for many of you, your institutions, your missions call you to look outward and have that impact. But having that calling and delivering on it every day are often two different things. And so it might be an advanced manufacturing center. It might be a new kind of training opportunity. It might be an experiential learning program. But there are ways that colleges and universities can really be catalysts for workforce and economic development. And I had the good fortune of working with Wake Forest University and Atrium Health on a really interesting project in Charlotte that I think speaks to this outward focused strategy and the way that universities and their partners can really make a difference in communities. Charlotte's an amazing place. It's also the largest metro area without a medical school. It also has some of the biggest disparities in health and wealth by race and income. And Atrium, which is a healthcare provider, a health system that also has an educational system within it to do allied health, physical therapy, nursing, respiratory therapy, stepped up. And so did Wake Forest, saying, we're going to create a satellite medical school outside of Winston-Salem. We're going to partner a health system and a university and a medical school working together, and we're going to anchor a new innovation district that's going to redevelop an area of Charlotte. And we're going to do it in a highly collaborative way, because not only are we going to bring together the Wake Forest School of Medicine, we're going to bring together the Carolina College of Health Sciences, which has all the allied health under Atrium. We're going to bring together Wake Forest's College of Continuing and Professional Studies. We're going to bring together their satellite business school. We're going to bring together surgical training for doctors in the field to come and get recertified by a French company named ERCAD. This is the only site they're going to have in the US. All working together under, well, I guess not one roof, but in one district that mixes live, learn, and work spaces in a vibrant area that's welcoming to a variety of different folks. And I think making this work was so engaging the community to make this work, I think was so critical. And there was, I think, one sentence, maybe more than one sentence, but there was one part of Wake Forest's security design guidelines that I thought was so good, because they said, the degree to which we're involved in the planning is the degree to which we can effectively support and operate the facility. And I think that's true not only for public safety, but for every aspect when you're connecting planning and operations. So knowing that these facilities were going to support surgeons coming back for continuing ed, MBA students, community groups coming for a program or a clinic, middle school and high school students coming to meet a mentor or on a career discovery program, medical students, nursing students, physical therapy students. We had to have lots of conversations about how this would work, how it would be used, who would be coming there, so that it could be better operated, and so that all these different groups could share space, use it at different times, and create, not a fortress, but a welcoming space that's safe and secure and sustainable. Because I think a really important part of their curriculum, they call it a prescription for the planet, is actually embedding sustainability in the curriculum. And given that healthcare as a sector is about 8.5% of carbon emissions, they're part of the White House 50% reduction by 2030 pledge. So they're trying to do their part, both in terms of the curriculum, but in terms of the space as well. And as part of this, they're not only looking outward at the scale of the planet, but they're looking outward at the scale of the city, the region, and it's on target to get LEED zero carbon, to be well certified, to create 5,000 jobs in the district and 11,500 in the surrounding community, and to take $1.5 billion of initial investment and return 7.6 annually to the region. So I think it's a great example of when you turn your strategy outward, the kind of impact that you can have. So now let's talk about structure. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have the right structure in place, that can get in the way of student success, because that's when you have disparate spaces, you have disparate strategies, you have divisions, separations, silos, instead of, dare I say, synergies. And so as we think about structure, I think it coincides with a moment in higher ed when we have financial uncertainty. We have a lot of campuses that are overbuilt for a previous level of enrollment. We have right now more schools than there are students, right? We have about 4,000 degree granting institutions, and we have fewer students attending them. So we have about one college closing per week, about 50 a year now. And it's really time to think about using what we have better, consolidating, collaborating, coordinating, growing in place instead of building more space, renovating as opposed to, we all love building a new signature building, myself included. But I think that the idea that if you build it, they will come, the idea that we're going to default to expansion, I think those days are over. And I think the great thing about the end of that era is it gives us a chance to look at what we have, look at our space utilization, look at what's divided, look at what could be co-located and better coordinated. And this is exactly what we did at University of Michigan in Weiser Hall. And it was interesting that the charge from the provost was to do two things. It was to bring together a bunch of disparate institutes and centers, the Center for Complex Systems, the Center for China Studies, the Center for Engaged Learning, and do it by creating what he called, quote unquote, the academic building of the future. A kind of a high bar. By the way, never name anything of the future because it's immediately dated. Or tomorrow. Don't call it something of tomorrow either. Then you end up, what's like Epcot Center or something. So, but the canvas that we were working on, or the building we were working with, was this brick tower, double-loaded corridor, cinder block walls. So it was quite a challenge, but I think we were up to it. And it happened at a time when Michigan was trying to create a much more sustainable financial model for these institutes and centers, which are very, very fluid, right? You get a new grant, you have a new partner, you staff up, it goes away, you staff down. And Michigan was moving to a shared services model. So instead of everyone having their own IT, their own finance, their own events person, their own HR person, within these centers and institutes that might have 5 people or 25 people, what if they could share these support services and come together to share services, to share space, to share ideas? And so it became a center of centers. And to do that, we really had to think about who these different centers were. And it was interesting. We distilled it to 3 types. There were more introverted centers, like a Center for Complex Systems, which is systems thinkers, physicists, that they basically need a whiteboard and coffee and some quiet space. And they don't want to talk to a ton of people until they've figured something out, and then they want to talk to everybody about it. Or somebody like the Center for Engaged Learning, which is an extroverted center. They do a lot of programming. They're trying to get students and faculty interested in doing real-world projects with companies, community groups, very outward-facing, lots of workshops, lots of programming. And then the third kind was a support service or a support center, IT, finance, HR, technology. I guess that's IT and technology, the same thing. Events, admin. And so what we ended up doing, in order to provide the kind of flexibility as we brought these different folks together, we programmed the office building kind of like a lab building. We said, okay, there's sort of small, medium, and large, and there's introverted, extroverted support. And that gave us sort of 9 different generic programs we could use. And then we used a kind of a modular layout where imagine a 6-person conference room becomes a faculty office, becomes a shared postdoc office or a shared grad student office. And that allowed us to move between these different things as the centers grew, shrank, or changed, and allowed us to capitalize on the narrow floor plate to bring in lots of daylight and to create a much more efficient design. Actually, we ended up cutting the carbon emissions in half from about 1,200 metric tons annually to 600 before and after the renovation. And the way we were able to do better building performance was combined with actually better occupant performance, because we integrated change management as part of the process. We really thought about involving the people, right? Just like we were talking about at the table early, thinking about how they could use it, different uses, different users. We created a welcome guide so people knew what to expect. We hosted a whole bunch of workshops on how they were going to use the building, what the norms would be. So there was sort of general agreement about what the building was for, what each space was for, how they would be used, how they would be shared. Lots of shared meeting spaces, classrooms, who can book what when, all these kinds of things. You know, it's like anything. If you talk about it before there's a problem, before you're in the heat of the moment, you can work a lot out in advance. And that's what we did with the change management. And then we made a lot of operational tweaks. And part of that was based on doing a post-occupancy evaluation after it had been open about 6 months. And my favorite thing from the POE, we learned a lot of great things, some things about signage, about, it turned out there were certain like secret booking rooms, secret rooms that only some certain admin could book, and much to the consternation of others. So we fixed a lot of those kinds of things, flaws in the scheduling system, improved the signage. But my favorite thing we learned from the POE is that we saved the occupants on average 4.26 hours a week. And so through better design and better change management, everyone got 10% of their week back. Who doesn't want to get 10% of their week back or hire 10% more people basically for free? So it was a great example of bringing together different centers, different institutes, sharing space, sharing ideas. And I think the change management was a critical part of that. And one of my favorite principles in change management is before you ask someone to let go of something, you have to give them the new thing to hold on to. It sounds really simple, but before you ask them to change something they're doing today, which they're holding on to, tightly, they're finding safety, security in, they need to know what they're going to be able to hold on to in the future. And so you can imagine programming an office building kind of like in this generic way, in this flexible way, bringing together different folks, 24 different folks that had different spaces around campus. Identity was a real question. Are we going to lose our sense of identity of who we are? We used to have our own space, now we're sharing space. And so we asked them to give up that, but we gave them something new to hold on to, which was each institute would have, or if they were quite small, they might share one, but would have a kind of an anchor space, an identity space. For some, it would be a seminar room, others a gallery, others a library, others a lounge. And these were the larger spaces that were kind of like a magnet: daylight, green wall, food, kitchenette. And these became the thing that the groups could hold on to because they had their kind of, though their office space might be shared or somewhat generic, to have that flexibility, they had some sense of identity in these spaces, and that worked quite well. So our last barrier, culture, and I think it's pretty common that we're relying on tradition. In a way, that's a huge strength of higher education. It's one of the reasons it's so durable, right? Like the average lifespan of a public company in the US is plummeting. It used to be decades, now it's years. But higher ed is pretty darn durable. And part of that is the traditions. So it's not throwing it all out, but it's thinking about where the culture is getting in the way of institutional goals, of success. And sometimes this happens in big ways, sometimes it happens in small ways. But I think as we think about campuses that might be overbuilt, as we think about opportunities to partner with companies, with community groups, as we think about the supply of schools exceeding the demand of students, as we think about a new future where there are problems that can only be solved by groups coming together, that means our campuses are going to be more porous, our spaces are going to be more shared, and that is going to be a culture change to how they're used and operated. And the example I want to share is the Tepper School of Business. And I share it because I think a lot of times business schools are seen as pretty insular. They're separated, they're elite, they're perceived as elite, maybe a lot of wood paneling involved, dark rooms. But Tepper's vision was really to kind of turn that on its head. And how can we define a business school based on its interconnections, not based on its insularity? And so doing that was sort of a mindset shift, because we started off thinking of the building not as a business school building, but as a university building with a business school in it, which sounds like a small change in wording, but it's actually a huge change in perception. Because the business school program proper, the classrooms, the offices, the study space, that's only 2/3 of the building. The other third is serving the campus and the community. It has the campus welcome center for prospective students, has the center for teaching and learning, where faculty and grad students, other instructors can come to learn how to make their teaching more interactive and engaging, to do the kind of experiential learning projects we've been talking about. It has the Center for Entrepreneurship that's open to all students, not just business school students. It has dining, it has fitness that are open to all the campus. And so creating this more open, porous facility was certainly a lot more complicated, right? We had to think about zones and layers and where can the public go, where do you need to swipe in, where's the sort of the line between the general population that might be there for an admissions info session. How do you give executives that are there for executive education or for an executive MBA, how do they get to where they're going? Where can they take a business call? How do you have a space that's kind of like a airport lounge that's serving that executive function? So we had to think about all these different uses and users, create layers of access, public, invited, private, and find ways to bring these different functions together so that collaboration could happen and these connections could happen at many scales. It might happen at the scale of a team in a classroom, right, where you have students working at clusters of tables or round tables working on a problem. Maybe they are, in fact, one of their projects was to create a marketing plan for the health system down the road. And it can happen not just in the classroom at the scale of a student team, but it can happen on a research initiative, bringing together faculty and students across the campus, students and faculty using the fitness center, the dining center, the teaching and learning center, the entrepreneurship center. And it can happen not only by bringing these different functions together, but doing them in the right way, doing them with what you might call socializing architecture, right, where different functions share a common space. And the central atrium has two things that drive people to the middle of the building and pull them out of their separate spaces: bathrooms and elevators that actually bring people to the center, as well as the natural light and the food and the fitness and the programming and the events. And this turned out to be a really successful way of bringing folks together and sharing space and creating a business school that's not based on insularity, but is based on interconnections with local companies, with executive education, with prospective students and families, with collaborators across the campus. And I think it required a culture change, right? It required that mental shift of, this isn't a business school building, it's a university building with a business school in it. And it required building those relationships across disciplines and departments, and that mix of shared and dedicated spaces, of open and enclosed spaces, so that people could find strength and flexibility in diversity, not just flexible spaces that you can move things around, like this room, which is great, but also having a variety of rooms and a variety of spaces used in a variety of ways. So I want to thank everybody for a great discussion, for your attention. And I think as you think about creating better connected colleges and universities on your campus, really think about how your strategy can look outward at community and company and regional and state needs, and how you can make an impact, how your mission calls you to make that impact, developing the workforce of the future, the skills, the relationships they need, catalyzing economic development, creating jobs, creating impact, especially in times of financial uncertainty. As you look at your campus, think about what's distributed, what's dispersed, what could be consolidated or coordinated, where can you collaborate so that you can grow in place instead of add more space, and think about how not only you can get over those structural barriers, but the cultural ones as well, to create more permeable campuses, more shared spaces. And as you do this, I want to leave you with one final thought. 80 years ago, the precursor to the CIA, the OSS, created what was now declassified, a simple sabotage field manual. And it was basically a playbook for spies to disrupt the workings of an organization. And you could disrupt it physically by cutting off their power, but you could also disrupt it organizationally. And this playbook is full of tactics that, unfortunately, 80 years later and in higher ed, probably sound really familiar. They're things like argue over minutia and terminology, bring up past decisions that have already been made to slow progress, make all committees large, never less than 5, argue for reason, for caution, make sure you go through channels. And I think if we want to create better connected colleges and universities, it's really about flipping the script on this, right? It's keeping the big picture in mind instead of getting stuck in the weeds. It's going into a meeting as a leader, as a manager, and saying, not what do I have to stop to manage risk, but what can I say yes to make progress, even if it's big or small. And I think if we do that, if we flip the script, then we can really enable student success. We can go beyond the conventional wisdom that it's about tradition, that it's about adding more and more, that it's about adding people in programs, that demographics are our destiny, that more is better, that it's about staying in our lane. And instead, we can create colleges and universities that draw strength from agility, that see differentiation as their strength, that instead of getting spread thin, doing more with less, they have the strategy to focus and do less with more, that they build niche communities, that they partner with industry on research and innovation and experiential learning, and they make bold decisions to help their students succeed. Thank you all very much.